Welcome to Grief in Media, a podcast where we laugh, cry, feel seen in our grief, and everything in between. I'm your host, Alex Piscatelli. Let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of the Grief in Media podcast. This is actually the season finale, so I saved the best guest for last, would you say?
Oh my, well, don't ask me that.
I love all my other guests, though.
Don't ask me that because I'm a Capricorn and I'll say yes.
But today, that other voice you are hearing is Lo from the Bravo Therapy podcast, where healing meets housewives. And I feel like this has been a long time coming a bit. Like, I feel like we messaged first a couple months ago, or maybe I messaged you first.
Let me just tell you, this is kismet,
yes.
Right? By the way, I always try to find somewhere where I can use that word. You know those words that you have where you're like, where can I use that word?
Yes.
I feel like Ty from Clueless when she first learns about what sporadically means. But yeah, it was so, the stars were aligned, I feel like, because when you messaged me, and I'm not going to remember what date because as we'll talk about here, I was going through like severe grieving at that time. But when you messaged me, it was, I had put myself on pause for the podcast because I was like, in the midst of grief. And I think when I finally saw the message, it was like probably weeks to like a month after or something. And it was so weird because I'd been thinking like, ugh, I should probably get back to the podcast. Like, I don't know, like, will I be able to do it after this? And I saw your message and I was like, sometimes truly on LinkedIn, I will ignore.
Because sometimes some people need to be ignored on LinkedIn,
there's some spam going on there.
Right.
And then also it just reminds me like this is probably something I need to take care of, or this is like an opportunity. I'm self-sabotager, so that's a whole nother thing. But when I saw yours, I was like, oh, let me open it. And I read your message, and you had actually found me through like my day job, right? Which is at Common Sense Media, which also folds into all of this. But then you were like, oh, yeah, I saw that you have a podcast and it's about like reality TV and like healing through like reality TV and stuff like that. And when I read your message, I was like, wait, because you were like, I have a newsletter and a podcast that's all about grief and media. And I'm like, wait, that's like truly what I'm going through right now.
Yes.
And it connects to what I'm doing. And I was like, is this some sort of sign? And I'm a huge believer. So when I saw that, I was not answering anyone. I wasn't even answering people like on Instagram that were my friends that were like, are you okay? I'm like, everyone leave me alone. Right. And I feel like I answered that one and I was like, I knew I couldn't commit to it like in that moment, but I was like, wait a minute. I love this. I love this idea. We need to do a podcast swap. BRB. And now we're here.
Yes.
I'm so excited.
Which I'm so excited for. And your podcast, as you mentioned, just came back for a new season.
Yes.
And it's been great, which we'll definitely get into.
Yes.
I want to get into all this episode for those who didn't see the title yet, but it's going to be all about Bravo, mental health, and grief and the intersections of those. But first I wanted to ask you, your personal experience with grief. You alluded to it. However much you feel comfortable sharing, would love to hear about it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm an open book here, so tell me when to stop, really. But yeah, grief has been a really interesting thing in my life because I think for such a long time I like did not always equate like loss to grief because I felt in some way that like grief would only really be this process that was happening with like people that I lost that I like was super close to, or like had to have like a specific type of relationship to them. But in reality, like as I'm thinking about it, I've experienced like a lot of loss, like my entire life, but a lot starting in high school. I went to a high school in Palo Alto, which is actually like known for a lot of mental health issues happening there because of all the pressure. And it was I've
heard about I can't remember the school, but I've heard
Pali.
About this.
So I went to Palo Alto High School, and that's where like this kind of like epidemic of kids jumping in front of, trains started. And it started when I was at high school. And so like it was happening in high school, and it was, started with my friend's brother. And then I lost like so many people from my high school. They call my graduating class like the cursed class
Wow.
because a huge group of my guy friends have all lost like at least one of their siblings. It was just so strange. So it was almost like grief was just like embedded in my life from high school on. But I think where like I really started to like understand grief was in such a different way, in a dynamic way, was when my dad was in an accident in, gosh, I think it was either 2010, 2011. He was hit by a drunk driver as a pedestrian, and he was in LA at the time, actually performing with his band, and ended up going into the ICU. He was there for almost 2 months. And at a certain point, my, I'm an only child. So the doctors were going back and forth with me. My son was only 3 at the time. So I was like going out there every weekend, but had to like leave, my son with my mom. And it was so weird.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad who is still here with us today, thank goodness. They prepared me to like get his affairs in order. Like I still remember that call of, we suggest that you start to get his affairs in order and figure things out. And I was like, what?
Right.
And it took me like a second to realize what they were saying was like, your dad is about to pass. And I mean, so it was such a weird experience now, having gone through like so much more grief after that, because my dad didn't pass. Like
Right.
he ended up making it through. I will say like the version of my dad that I knew did. Right.
Right.
And it was so strange because I physically and mentally like went through the process of my brain shutting off. I went into like robot mode. I was like, okay, what needs to get done? Da 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 da. All these things that I didn't realize at the time was like preparing me for grieving, which not everyone gets.
Right.
I know too, because a lot of times it's just like very instant. But I was going through the whole process of like preparing myself mentally for my dad to die, and he didn't. And then he came out of that and he rehabbed. It was like a whole like couple years of like rehabbing and him just trying to like figure things out. And a lot of my dad that I once knew is gone. And that's something where I'm like, I definitely need to go to therapy for that, because
Right.
there's still moments where I'm like, for a very long time, I couldn't even like look at my dad.
Right.
I couldn't connect with him because I was angry. I was so angry that like, where's my real dad? And it's still something I like go through, but that was kind of my first introduction into like how grief can look so different, because he didn't actually die.
Right.
But to me, some parts of him did die. And like the person that I knew died,
Right.
and it's so hard to navigate that, because I can't tell people that, because especially like people who've gone through like loss, it's like, well, at least you have your dad.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And it's hard too, because already people don't talk about grief.
Mm-hmm.
So they even more so don't talk about grieving parts of someone that are no longer there. It's so true.
Totally. And I think that like we do with so many other things in this world, is like we look at things through binaries that are not real. And it really like constrains us into these like little boxes that don't allow us to be our full like selves, right? So, that was always really difficult. And to be honest, like now it's what, oh my gosh, like I was talking to him the other day, and we talk about, the accident will come up often in our conversations just because it's affected him so much, and he's very like understanding of that. But I just feel like no matter how much time goes by, I still think of it. But now, having gone through other grief, it's just really interesting to see like, oh, I still need to process that. And that's
Right.
come up a lot recently because, as you know, when you reached out to me, I was dealing with grieving my uncle. And that was a really weird that happened. His passing was this past April. And it was the weirdest thing because my grandmother, who was like the matriarch of our family on my dad's side, this is all on my dad's side, by the way, she had passed in April of, I believe it was April 2nd of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
A year later, April 18th,
Mm-hmm.
my uncle passes. So this was this year. And all these things are coming up because I'm like, what? I didn't even get to grieve my grandmother passing, which was really difficult. And then now my uncle has passed. And that was something that it wasn't sudden, but it was fully, fully, fully unexpected. So for him, it was like he had been found in the house, in the room that my grandmother died in, because he had purchased her house. Right. He had just like finished purchasing her house. And he had been there for my grandma like the whole time, you know, she had gone through her accident and, you know, she was older. So I think for us, it was really hard to deal with her passing. And we were all around for her passing. But it felt like she lived a full life, right? She was in her mid to late 80s. And we were all there when she passed, and she got to pass at home like she wanted to with her integrity. And like, it was a several day kind of thing. And, you know, I'm half Mexican, half Jamaican. So that side is my Mexican side. And so we like celebrate, you know, the life of someone. And it really felt like that was happening. And there was like this peacefulness around it. But with my uncle, he was found unresponsive. We don't even know how long he was like that, by my cousins, and went into the ICU. There was this whole process of like, what's going to happen? You know, I went out and saw him once, and then, you know, because this was in San Diego, and then we had a group text throughout the family of like how he was doing. My dad was going out there. My uncles were out there. Everyone was out there kind of like seeing him. But with the text, it was like for weeks, he was getting better. It was about the progress, even though he was in the ICU. And then all of a sudden, it went from one day being like, he's doing like, he's getting up and he's sitting in the chair and he's doing this and he's being responsive to, he's going into hospice and everyone needs to get here.
Right.
And I've like never dealt with that ever, you know? So that was different, right? Than what I dealt with my grandma, which was different than what I dealt with back in like 2016 with my aunt who passed away from breast cancer, again, on my dad's side. So all of this is on my dad's side. Right. And when she, you know, she had breast cancer before, it came back, it metastasized throughout her bones. And then she actually didn't like even tell anyone really. She was going into hospice till kind of like last minute. She didn't want anyone to come and see her or be with her because she had like so much pride about like how she went out, you know? And she wasn't going to let anyone see her like struggle or be weak. And so I never got to see her before she passed, which is always something that like has been hard for me. So all of that to say is that like I've dealt with a lot of grief on my dad's side. And I think just these two last passings and where I am as just a human now and my growth process has allowed me to step back and like truly look at how grief looks different, not just for everyone, but in every situation, for every family member, right? So it's definitely something I'm still trying to understand and process, and each loss brings up something from the last one, which I think is like really amplifies the whole understanding that like you have to go through the healing process. Right. You have to, or else it's going to come up again later.
Do you feel like, how do you as a family talk about grief? Because so many, you know, losses have happened. Do you, I'm sure you're still figuring it out altogether, but how has that been?
No, that's an amazing question, because the way I talk about like mostly like also my uncle's passing, right? Because that's so fresh. But even like my grandma's passing, or like when we talk about my aunt, it's different with different family members because you have to understand, like my dad, I'm an only child, but my dad is one of 7, right?
So big family.
Big family. Yeah, big family. So, you know, like each person has their own way of dealing with things. And I mean, I started to notice this like even farther back before my dad's accident when my grandfather passed. Like I was there the moment my grandfather took his last breath. It was like during Thanksgiving, which was his favorite holiday. It was right when the turkey came out. And it was me and my cousin on either side of him, and he like took his last breath, right? And that was the first moment that I realized like every single person in my family deals with grief differently. And I was seeing like the aftermath of that. So, you know, some people are very avoidant. Some people like really want to talk about it. Some people are like very angry, you know. I've really known that like I can always go to one of my cousins, my cousin Evie. Her and I really think about grief the same way. We know it's difficult, but we also try to find the beauty in it. And so with my relationship with her, we'll really be like, oh, you know, with my uncle, we'll be like, hey, I saw the same crow today. And we call it like the Uncle Robert bird, right?
I love that.
Or we'll see like a hummingbird, and we know that like that's my grandma, or a butterfly, and that's my Aunt Martha. So with her, I can talk to her about that freely without being like, you're a weirdo, right? And then some of our other family, when we try to tell them stuff like that, you could tell that they like close off to it a bit. I still remember I had gone to see a medium like a week after my uncle died, because I'd already had this trip planned with my friend Michael to go to New Orleans. And there was a place that I really loved out there that I'd gone to, like an energy reader. And I love all that stuff. And I'm like, maybe I'll try to see a medium. I'd never seen a medium before, but I'm like, let's see what happens, right? It was only like barely a week since my uncle had passed. I was still freshly like in shock. And when I went, like, I'll just tell you, everything this woman was saying, I was like, oh my gosh. It was my uncle was there, my grandma was there, my aunt was there. They were, and all the things they were saying, like some of these things had already come to fruition. But there was one thing that had happened where like my uncle had given me this message to tell one of my aunts. And I was like, okay, what? Like, and it was my aunt who I was like, I don't know if she'll receive this.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't know. So when we went to my uncle's celebration of life, I knew that was the time. And I talked to my cousin about this of like, how do I say this message? You know, knowing at this point through all the loss on that side, kind of how each person dealt with grief, I was like, I don't know if I want to say this. So I said something to one of my other aunts, my Aunt Tilly. I said, you know, hey, like I saw this medium, blah, blah, blah. This is what happened. She's like, okay. Like, she's like, I think we want to know. So they were both really open to it, both of my aunts. And I sat down and I talked to them about it. And they were like, you know, one of my aunts, she didn't really say anything. She was crying, but she wasn't saying anything. And I'm like, I wonder if I just like, was that the wrong thing to do?
Right.
But what I realized is like, everyone was just internalizing and processing a different way. And I think it was like what she needed to hear. I just felt that in the moment. But it's just really interesting to see how each one of us, like, I have an uncle that like, you know, my dad keeps himself busy. And he'll talk about the things every so often. But as people are crying, like in the midst of everything, when we were trying to get things done, like he's helping to sell my uncle's house, like as people are like crying or like we'll sit and, you know, really in the grief, he'll be like, okay, I need to call this and I need to do this list and, you know, I need to do that. So that's how he does that, right? Like I have another uncle where it's like, you don't really hear from him because he's totally detached himself because he probably can't deal with it. and he's already like that in other ways. So it's just really interesting to see how everyone else, how everyone deals with things.
I'm curious, like, going to a medium, had you ever considered that before, and would you do it again? Like, I'm always curious about that, because I don't know if I would do it. It's not that I don't believe in it. It just kind of scares me a bit. I don't know. So I'm curious your thoughts on it.
I want to say before I answer this that there's this perfect moment, and I will try to find I will find the episode for you so you can link it. But there's this perfect moment in one of the seasons that I hated the most of Vanderpump Rules, but this was a great moment. It was where this woman, she was a newer cast member, Dana, had lost her mother. Mm-hmm. And Scheana, who everyone knows, you know, Scheana, Scheana, was trying to do something nice for her. For her, I think it was either the anniversary of her mother's death or it was her birthday. It was one of the two things. And Scheana had, I forget how it went, but Scheana pretty much like hired a medium to come to Dana's
house.
Without
Dana's.
Well, here's what she had said. She had asked her if she'd be open to it.
Okay.
I think there was like a phone call. And Dana, I think it was very vague of like, I don't know. We'd have to see, blah, blah, blah. So then the scene comes up and Scheana comes over and like is talking to Dana. And I think this is where she like really says like, if I had a medium, would you like, I think it was in person that she says it, right?
Right.
And she's like, I just really wouldn't want that. Like Dana's saying, you know, like I wouldn't want that. I don't even know how long it had been since her mom had passed. I want to say between like 2 to 5 years or something like that. I don't remember. But I remember like you could tell Dana's like visceral reaction of like, ooh, like, I don't know about that. Right. Mm-hmm. And in the moment I was like, girl, I would totally want to know. But you have to like respect where she's at with that. Right. And some people feel uncomfortable. And then Scheana walks out. So, because producers are with her, right? So she's like nervous. Okay, I understand. But you could tell Scheana was like a little annoyed. Like, I want you to have this, right? In true Sheena's for like fashion. For anyone who listens who has not seen Vanderpump Rules, just go look up some clips of Scheana Shay.
My favorite, this is a total side note, but in the latest season of Vanderpump Rules, in the reunion, so one of the for those who don't know, one of the dogs of someone who like was involved in the Scandival because it was Raquel's and what's his name? I'm blanking. James Kennedy's dog. Yes. But then James Kennedy got the dog back, and the dog is named Hippie. So obviously Hippie was like a big part of the season. Yeah. So Andy Cohen was like, oh, and there was one person who's not sitting here who was a big part of this season. And Scheana goes, Summer Moon.
I mean, and that is like epitomizes who Scheana is. She truly does mean well, I believe. Mm-hmm. But it's Sheena's world and we just all live in it. And that's what it is. And so
like no one else thinks it's Sheena's world. It's really just her.
And she's so happy living in that world. Because she's been told these things many times and she just still lives there. So honestly, like, let that Delulu come true. I kind of sometimes I'm like, I wish I lived in like.
Yeah, like a little, I wish I was in my own world a little bit more.
It's like a little
that would
island.
be great.
I know. I'm like, I can't be, but great. Good for you, girl. But that totally epitomizes her. And that is what was happening in this moment where she was like, wait, but I did this thing for her. And like, this was going to be an amazing moment for me because I had done this and it was such a good idea. But she had not once thought about Dana herself. So then Dana like closes the door. You could tell she's like, this is fucking weird, right? Like, why? Like, that is so weird. What type of gift is that, right? And then Dana, because all these people live in like apartments and like in LA, right? She can hear what's going on downstairs, and what's going on is Scheana is talking to the medium who she had show up and is saying, oh, she actually doesn't want it. Da, da, da. And she comes out of her apartment. She goes, Scheana, is this the person? And she's like, oh, well, I just had thought like I'd want her there if you said yes. She's like, wait, so you literally brought her here without even. So your question like brings like it just that all I always say all roads lead to Bravo.
Yeah, they really do.
And they do. And I will prove it to you every single time. But it just made me think of that because it's so funny because to me, I am a little bit of a Scheana Shay in the sense of like, I love energy readers.
Yeah.
I want to be connected to the other side. Like, you know, during the Day of the Dead, like I get so excited because it is where they say like the veil, you know, which is that kind of like screen between like our living world and like the passed on world,
Right.
is like so thin. And I do come from a culture, like definitely on my dad's side, that is like, we like celebrate that. You know what I mean? You watch the movie Coco, it really is like that,
Yeah.
you know? And so I love to be connected to that. And I see like signs of like people who have passed away every day. And like that is my vibe. And I totally respect that it's not everyone's vibe.
Right.
And sometimes I do need to pull myself out of that because I'm like, don't you want to be connected? But like it is a personal thing. But personally, I would go back to like, I want to go to a medium once a year.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I connect personally to, you know, those who've passed on. I have my little rituals like during the Day of the Dead, or like I have like a little ancestor altar in my house that's just like those have passed away who I can like write to or talk to like in my own personal space. But I think like seeing a medium, there's something about that like affirmation of what I already know.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was amazing. And I just knew I wanted to because I'm already in, like, that's already kind of how I am. Mm-hmm. That's how I even started the podcast, is because I am kind of like a little woo woo. I love my crystals.
Yeah.
I love like connecting to the other side. I love manifesting, like, you know what I mean?
Definitely.
And so I would do it like a million times more. And I want to do it like every year.
Oh, I love
sure.
that.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm of the mindset where I do believe in that stuff. And I think I do believe in signs, but it's also hard to, like, it's almost like sometimes I'll talk myself out of it in ways.
Yeah.
Even though I don't want to, like, I want to believe the signs. But do you feel like, I love asking this question because especially in this space, because I feel like people are open to it. But
yeah.
Like, do you feel like that makes you less scared of death? Like, what's your sort of relationship with death?
Yeah. I absolutely love all your questions because I need, like, these are the things that I'm like, I think about on a daily basis, but I don't like qualify them. Right. I think about death all the time now. I think I started to think about death all the time the moment I brought life into this world.
Right.
When I had my son, I was 21, and I've never really thought as much about death than I have since I had him, because the moment that like I had him, I was like, how am I going to keep another human alive?
Yeah.
Like, truly, like, to this day, sometimes, I mean, he's turned 16 this year, and I'm like, how have I kept a human alive? Like, I didn't even know how I could keep myself alive, like, let alone another human. So that was always on my mind. And then, you know, obviously then seeing the trajectory of like my dad almost passing, and then my aunt, and like all these things, really have I don't want to say forced me, but like have opened a door for me to like examine death. Because I will say, for a very long time, I was terrified of it. Terrified. And I think that probably did have to do with being a parent, and you're so scared to lose something. I often just think like we're always terrified to be parted. You know, it has to do with like our fear of change. Mm-hmm. But then like this is like a permanent change of losing someone, right? I want to say like I'm myself, maybe I am a little afraid of dying myself, but it's more for like the grief that my son will have to go through.
Right. You
know, because let's be honest, if I'm being like morbid, right? Like, which is a little bit of my humor and how I get through things. When I pass, like I don't know that I'll know, like I don't know that I'll feel it. Like
right.
you know what I mean?
Right.
But it's really like what I'm doing to like other people, like what that does to other people. So I just have this new relationship with death where I feel like I'm less afraid of it. And I think this has come through within the last like year, within my grandmother passing and my uncle passing, and just reflecting upon that internally. I think I'm less afraid, and I do think that it is because I have seen these signs, and I have seen that we continue like talking about these people, and that, you know, that I just feel like it is our human like bag of skin that is leaving. But if you make an impact on even one person, whether that's your child or your friends or, you know, your family, whatever that is, like, you're never truly gone. And the one thing I've learned that I think does make me a little less afraid of death and have like actually a more maybe healthy relationship with it is that like everything is so uncertain in this world. That's what scares me about this entire world. Like, I'm a Capricorn. I need to know, right? And I've had to like release so much of my control, you know, because you can't control really anything almost other than like your own self and how you react and things like that. But there's so much uncertainty about life. And what I realized after both of these most recent passings is that the only thing that's certain in life is death.
Right.
That's the only certain thing. And I feel like I've had to pull myself so far out of like just the daily like, ooh, survival mode, or ooh, like what's going to happen, or ooh, is my business going to get here? Like living so much in the future, living so much like in the past, pull myself out and just be like, wow, I don't know when my last day is going to be. I don't know when anyone's last day is going to be. And yes, like the moment I say that, there's a sense of fear. But then if you sit with that, there's a sense of like gratitude. There's a sense of humanity. There's a sense of, you know, okay, so how can I embrace this now? Like, how can I embrace my life now? Because at the end of the day, like, we can't outrun death.
Right.
And we don't know when it's going to happen. And in a weird way, like, I just feel like that's given me a little bit more peace, because when I think about it like that, then I can live a bit more
Right.
in the moment.
Definitely. No, it's so true. I think it's funny what you say about control too, because when my dad passed away, I feel like I don't think I was an anxious child. I feel like it really started with his passing. It's hard to fully remember, but I feel like, I mean, I think I would get anxious for certain things, but like a really just existential anxiousness, I think, happened after he passed. And then since my mom passed away, I almost feel more in control of my emotions in a weird way. I think because now I've been processing my dad's death too, and not just my mom's. Like it's both of them. But then also, like when my mom passed, since it was from cancer, whereas my dad, it was more sudden. Even though my mom's cancer was all quick, but at least we had to have more conversations about death and grief together. Like she was very much like, don't be afraid, it's not a scary thing. Like she was scared just to leave us behind, but not really of death itself. And so I think that helped a lot with that mindset of being like, okay, my mom wasn't afraid, so why should I be, type thing. I don't know, it's interesting. Like I'm scared of losing loved ones, but it's like, yeah, I don't know. I agree with you. Like I feel very much like more in the moment than I ever have.
I think that's really beautiful that you said that, because I think that with each passing, we learn something new. And I think that being able to kind of like understand from each one, right? Like you said with your father's passing, like that it was more sudden. With your mom, you were able to even have some conversations about it.
Right.
And I think there's like something really beautiful about that, because it does allow you to just like sit in it and say, okay, like this is what it is, and like the other person's at peace too.
Right.
And I think that that's what we want to know, really, is like, will that person be at peace? You know, I think my uncle said something when he was passing that was really interesting. He had waited for kind of everyone to get there, which I've seen happen so often. And my cousin's a nurse, and I've talked to other nurses who say the same thing, where it's like often that will happen. So it's like weird that you see these little like, you know, reoccurring things around death. And again, this is when people know they're passing, right? Because it happens in so many different ways. But everyone had been there. He was still very conscious. Like he didn't, he was not even sleeping because he didn't want to leave his family. So like that was something too that was really hard when you're saying like, talking about like your mom not wanting to leave others behind, and how I said like I feel the same with my son. My uncle definitely felt that same way, and he was like holding on for other people. And so it was finally time where we were going to give him morphine so he could just rest, right? And so we knew what was happening from there and that he wouldn't be actively speaking to us. And he said something, and I mentioned this in my most recent podcast episode, but it just sticks with me like every day. He said, and he didn't even say it like in relation to death. He was just kind of like speaking out into the ether. And he said, it's hard, but it's not that hard. And we were like, what?
Yeah.
Like I was like, whoa, like a prophet, I'm like, I was like, what?
Yeah.
And I think someone asked him like, dying or something, and he's just like, yeah. And I was like, it's hard, but it's not that hard, and I think that there's just so much like we do like pontificating upon death and who we're going to leave behind and what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, if we're the ones who are still living after, we do have to like be able to keep moving forward. And that's scary. I think that's what's the scariest thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Well, I definitely want to talk because we've been talking a good amount. I love it.
Yeah.
I would love to get to the Bravo of it all because I know we're going to be talking about this for a bit.
Yeah.
But Bravo therapy, what really made you start it?
Oh my gosh. I have to give some credit to my friend Michael because he helped me see the light. He's also a clinical social worker, so that is technically kind of his job too. But I deal with depression and anxiety, and I was in like a depressive moment, and I would say over the last like 5-10 years, I've been really in these moments of like where I go through deep healing, and I'm like journaling, and I'm doing like meditation, and I'm doing all the things that you're, quote unquote, supposed to do to heal, and that have helped me heal in moments. But that I think I've like overthought too much about, in the sense of like, if I'm not doing those things, I'm not healing. Right. So I can get into like my mind like that. And it was a moment a couple years ago that I was totally in one of these spaces. I was like, okay, if I'm feeling depressed right now, then I should be journaling to get myself out of it, right? I should be doing something actively to get myself out of it. This is also my toxic like Capricorn trait of like being overproductive. And him and I, we often go back and forth on voice notes. I'm a voice note girly. I love a voice note.
I love that.
I love a podcast because it feels like a voice note.
Totally.
And so we'd go back and forth just like talking shit about like Bravo 24/7 or any reality TV show. But it was never like, oh, I just hate this person. Oh, this person sucks, right? Like it was like, who hurt this person? Oh, I feel like her trauma is coming out. Oh my gosh, I can totally relate because I used to be like that, or I am like that, or I overthink like this. It was us seeing ourselves in these situations, in these people. And like, even if they do have like hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars more than us, I was like, they're humans and they're having a human experience, and it's being shown on TV. Right. And I've always thought that was my draw toward reality TV, is that I'm like, it's healing in two senses, in the sense that it does allow you to just have moments of like, I need to disconnect, and like just allows you to be in other people's like petty bullshit and real bullshit. But it also allows you to like fully connect to the human experience and be like, ooh, I can reflect on my own self and my own healing. And like, it also lets you practice like empathy, right? And understanding and really seeing the human condition and seeing like, interactions and interpersonal interactions. And so with all that, we were messaging back and forth this day. And I remember just lying on my couch and being like, on the voice note, I said, well, I should be doing some healing work, but instead I'm like being like lazy and watching a shit ton of Bravo. And he sent back some message that was just like, that is healing work. Like, especially the way that you look at it, And within that, I was like, oh, that makes sense. And I think a few times he had said like, yeah, you should start a podcast.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, it's like Bravo therapy. Like, it's my Bravo therapy. And I was like,
I love that.
genius.
I love that.
And yeah.
I love, especially when a name just comes like so natural like that. It's like what you're already doing. Bravo therapy, duh. Like,
Well,
that's perfect.
You want to know something weird about that? Is that when I found out I was pregnant, I was going to fly to go see my grandma in Florida. And I was so scared to like tell anyone that I was pregnant because I was 21. I was like, oh shit, you know, like, what am I going to do? Like, what, you know, what's happening? But at that time, I was on the flight. I remember I was reading this Harry Potter book and I like fell asleep. At the time, I was probably only like 12 to 14 weeks pregnant. So clearly I don't know if I'm having a boy or girl or whatever. And at that time I was manifesting a girl, which clearly like that was my joke upon me from the universe to the Capricorn in me of like, oh, you love to plan things.
Yeah, you don't get this.
Yeah, you don't get to plan things. That's my forever lesson, by the way, in this world. But I was having some sort of dream. I cannot tell you what the dream was, but all I remember is the name Caleb Jordan. And I like woke up and I was like, what the heck? Caleb Jordan? I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, I don't even, I was like, it's so weird, right? And it wasn't until like months later that I find out I was having a boy and I'm like, Caleb Jordan. And that's my son.
Gosh.
So when you say like the name just comes to you, like that was like in the birth of my son. This is in the birth of my podcast. And like, it just felt once that name came, the development of it and like me like pontificating on it and like writing notes and notes and notes in my phone and just developing it just came so natural. And then when it was time to like release it, which I launched it this year on my birthday because I was like, we're both being rebirthed, right? It just felt natural. Mm-hmm. So I totally agree with that. Like something just coming to you. Yeah. That's your intuition. And I totally believe in that.
Definitely. Yeah. I know you love all sorts of reality TV, but what is it about Bravo for you?
Okay. So I think that Bravo really brought all of it together, right? Like when I first started watching reality TV, it was stuff like The Real World and like, Flavor of Love and all those things, right? Loved all of them. And I think it really started too from like loving soap operas and stuff like that. But Bravo was the first place that like solidified like reality TV in a way that's so different. And it centered around initially, and it's obviously like expanded past this, but it centered around women and women's relationship with one another. And that was something that was really fascinating for me because as an only child, like I didn't really understand relationships with other girls or other women. Right. Like growing up, I didn't have that. I like often played into the whole you should be like competing with other girls. I was like never really trusting of women. I think I have like major mommy issues. So I probably played into that too. Mm-hmm. And I was such a daddy's girl, like to this day too. So even in high school, like I had a super huge core group of guy friends and like maybe 2 or 3 like close girlfriends. But I never really had that relationship with women. And like then that developed as I got older, as I had my son, as I saw like some women like stick with me through like so many versions of myself, some where they should have just run for the hills and maybe they did in some points but always came back. But like I just started to see as I got older like what it meant to have like true sisterhood, what it meant to have like authentic like female relationships, and also what it meant to have non-authentic female relationships and why those were happening. And it wasn't just because like, oh, this is a shitty person. I mean, sometimes, but usually it was because within whatever trauma that we had and understanding like what our relationship to women is, we project that on other people. And there's no place you see that more clearly than a housewife show. Right. That it's just all of these women together trying to figure out interactions with one another, trying to like bond, trying to understand forgiveness, trying to understand communication. And I think there's something so special as a woman and like just even as a person to like see and understand that. And that's where I really like started to connect to Bravo so much. And I think that this whole idea of like the housewives is so interesting because I think it started off as like a double entendre. And I don't even think it was ever meant to just be like, oh, it should be housewives sitting in their house, like cleaning and cooking. I think that they were using that terminology to be like, women are so much more than that. And yes, I think it wanted to show the glitz and the glamour. And I think that was such a big part of it in the beginning. But what it's evolved into now is just like actually just women finding their own independence, women finding their strength and empowerment in so many different facets of life. Right. And I love watching it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it comes to someone who exemplifies either a mental health journey that you relate to or I don't know, someone who has that sort of representation that you were looking for, what Bravo celebrity really stands out for you?
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. This is a hard one. I feel like there's so many elements in like different people. I wouldn't use her as an example of like what I feel like is the best path in like the mental health journey or like in her growth. But what was so relatable is in Southern Charm, Catherine Dennis, she has gone through a lot. She's still going through a lot. But there was a season where her friends were like trying to find her. Like they had gone and done a wellness check on her because like she had just ghosted everyone. And when they finally found her, like at one of the episodes was them like coming to her door, knocking on the door, production's following them. They have to go to the landlord. They're trying to like get the landlord to go in there. And then the landlord comes out and they're like, yeah, she's in there. She doesn't want to talk to anyone. And they're like, oh my gosh. And they're all getting so mad at her. Right. Like when she finally comes back, you know, in the loop of things. And she's just like very kind of nonchalant. Like, I just had to be away from people. And everyone's like vilifying her. And she's just like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, she deals with like severe like depression, severe anxiety. And she's like, this is how I cope. And I've never seen something more relatable to me on TV. Where I was like, I've had that where people have been like, you just ghost. You're not here. You're not a good friend. You're not this. And I'm like, I do that. I go inward when things get rough. I go inward when things are like too much. And there have definitely been times where I'm like, that's been in a toxic way, like of like, I'm just going to avoid because I want to avoid and run away. But I've also recognized that part of it is like boundaries of like, I know this is too much for me right now, so I need to remove myself. And I think a lot of what was happening in that space was that for her. And I felt so bad for her that people couldn't understand that and that people were like vilifying that. But then it was also nice to see like when she was able to explain it to people and they were like, oh, okay. That, you know, giving them the benefit of the doubt that everyone deals with things so differently. So I wouldn't say she's like the epitome of like the full experience because there's been like problematic stuff with her since. But that like when you were asking me that question, that was something that came up for me because it felt like such a real moment that I hadn't really seen reflected on TV before. Yeah.
How do you feel like the way we talk about mental health has changed in the course of like Bravo history? Like, do you feel like when you talk about mental health with people, you can utilize that as a resource with people? Like talking about, oh, this happened in Bravo. Let's talk about it, you know, in our interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. I think what's really cool is that like if you would have watched Bravo from like the start like I did with OC, there was not really a lot of discussion around mental health and wellness. I mean, things would happen that were very clear, but that wouldn't be like a focus. And I think now, especially in the last like 5 years, just in our entire society, it's like mental health has been like the taboo of like talking about like mental health and wellness and like depression and anxiety, like it's starting to fade away. And we're really being able to like talk about it. And then also like media is starting to have a responsibility to talk about it. And I think what Bravo has started to understand is that not only do they have a responsibility, but they have like so many people on there that like have their own journeys that are relatable, that they can use their platform for like for good, right? So I definitely think that now you're seeing more storylines around people talking about like depression. You're seeing more storylines about people talking about their anxiety. You're seeing more storylines around grief and like actually like diving into it a bit more. So you're seeing the dynamic human more than just like what the perceived human is, and that is allowing for those conversations to happen more and more. And like so often when a conversation does start, when someone's like, oh, you watch Bravo, because that's truly like a conversation starter, and that's where I'm like, oh, you're my people. If someone watches Bravo, if someone watches like now Love Island or like some reality show that you love, you know, you already feel like, okay, I have something to talk to you about and connect to. But think about that, right? When you've ever talked to anyone who like loves the same show, whether it's a reality show or a regular show, it's always so awkward meeting someone for the first time, like, and you just like, ooh, small talk. And I hate small talk. I freaking hate small talk. But when you have something like that in common and you guys realize it, then all of a sudden the conversation starts to flow. And not only about that, right? So a lot of times within like reality TV, when I find someone who like loves the same show that I love or loves Bravo or whatever, we start talking. And then all of a sudden when we're talking about one of the women or one of the people on the show or one of the storylines, we connect it to our own story. And then all of a sudden we're talking about our lives. And all of a sudden we're having this like deep dive conversation with someone we've just met and connecting with them. And that's super cool to me because it is that kind of like, it kind of like takes out the small talk and makes the small talk actually fun and interesting that leads to the deeper stuff.
Right. I love that.
Yeah.
A question I had too is, you know, so much of reality shows and why we love them too is the drama of it all.
Oh, yeah.
Why? Why do you think that is?
Yeah. I ask myself this all the time because I do love a little like, I love a lot of drama. Not in my life. I love like other people's drama. I love like eavesdropping. I mean, this is also just in life too. Like I love eavesdropping. I am one to be like, what's going on over there? Like, let's watch. My son hates it because like if I see something happening on the side of the road, I'll go around and come back around to see.
To watch.
Yeah.
And he's like, no.
I'm problematic like that. But I think we all kind of have that insight. Like my thought process is this. There's a few different reasons. One is like a very easy one to notice, which is like it allows us to escape our own issues that are happening internally, right? Like, oh my gosh, watching someone else's drama like makes my drama look way more easy, right? Makes me feel like a lot better about myself. There are several times where I'm like, ooh, well, I'm not like that. Like, you know, if I feel like, gosh, I'm not like where I want to be in my growth, or like, hey, I reacted like this. And then I'm like, well, I didn't scream at someone or flip a table.
Yeah, I didn't flip
like,
a table. I was
we're
just thinking
good.
that.
I'm good. Like I've grown a lot. Like I could actually stop here if I wanted to, because I will say some of these women like don't grow, and that is actually something to see too. But I think another reason why we like love to watch the drama is, I don't know what it is. I think it's just like a weird psychological thing, and I want to like dive deeper into that. Like I love the psychology of like just being a human and why we do the things we do. And I just think that we live in a society where like we're not used to calm.
Right.
That's not quote unquote normal in this society. So we love the extra. We love the chaos. And I think, you know, maybe that's toxic, but it's sure making money.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So this can be Bravo related or anything, but what pieces of media have been helpful for you in processing grief in the Bravo world and outside of it?
Yeah. So I will say, like, in the Bravo world, I've noticed, because I was thinking about this question, and I was like, I've noticed that I'm not in the point yet where I'm like going, at least right now, because I'm still like in the grieving process of like my grandma and my uncle. And I never like mentioned too that like I had a friend that passed away right after my uncle. Yeah. So like all of that. But I've noticed that currently I'm using Bravo more as like an escape and less as a connector to like grief specifically, right? So that has been my nice escape. Bravo, Love Island, all of those things. It still allows me to feel some of my emotions too. Like when there's anything that comes up that's even like slightly like sad, like someone wins big, or like even like the finale of Love Island when they're talking to each other, I'm bawling.
Right.
But what I realize is like this is all the emotion that I haven't let come up, and it's just like a doorway, like a key that opens it. So even though I'm watching to kind of just like escape a little bit, which I also think there's a healthy part of that, it also lets me feel emotions without necessarily having to connect them straight to like the passing. So I would say Bravo shows, especially like Love Island has been a huge one that got me through everything. Vanderpump got me through a lot because that was happening at the time. So like that was an easy way to like check out. Although I think it like maybe triggered a little bit of my anger with what was going on there at the time. And definitely like Selling Sunset was like an easy one to just watch and kind of like.
Wait, did you watch Selling the OC?
Yes.
Oh
I watch them all.
So
I watch
good.
them all. So good. Both of those.
Yes.
And those were good ones where I like felt like when they were coming out, I'm like, oh, I could just lay on my couch and be like sad, but like in this like fun glitzy world.
Yeah.
But also what I've noticed is like I've gone to kind of, I have these comfort movies that I've always been like this since I was little. I would watch movies over and over and over again, like to go to bed.
Same.
Because it's like a comfort thing. Yeah. And even my aunt brought it up recently. She's like, oh my gosh, remember you used to do that? I'm like, oh, I still do it. But now just listening to people scream at each other on Housewives. I'm like there falling fast asleep and these women are screaming at each other. I'm like,
and you're like,
it's so soothing. It's like my noise machine, you know? But it's really interesting because this is how I know I'm like in this next chapter of my life and like next chapter of like learning how to deal with grief, because even in watching my go-tos, like Clueless is still my go-to, and like Mrs. Doubtfire is still my go-to.
I love that.
I've realized themes of grief that I like never actually, they're not blatant there.
Right.
But I've never actually related to until I watch them in this new headspace. So like if you go back to Clueless, she's living this out, all of these things, having told you just a clip of it in the beginning of it when she sees her mom's painting about how her mom had passed.
Oh my God, I totally forgot about that.
A fluke accident during a routine liposuction.
Right.
That's the whole line. Like, yeah, I could quote the whole movie to you. But, and she's living and now taking care of her dad. Right. Like, think about that theme. It's not blatant in that movie, but if you are dealing with grief and you're dealing with it like where you're not so engrossed in it, but you're able to also step back, which also takes like time and healing in your own life and like growth, right? I'm like, wow, this whole movie is about how she's trying to navigate like high school, which by the way, like no one looks like that in high school, but she's navigating those things and she's doing things like making people her pet project, trying to understand like men and like putting all of this stuff on like other people, on her dad, on Ty, trying to like make her pet project, right? Like putting these things on Josh. And you think about it, it's like, oh, she needed to see a grief counselor.
Yeah. Wait, that's so crazy. I have not thought about that before.
Yeah.
With Clueless. I need to rewatch it now. That is wild.
Rewatching some of these films with like that lens is so wild because it's such a brief moment that you learn about that, and it's not even like a huge part of this.
Right.
But it is in a sense because it is fueling like who she is as a person and how she's healing and like how she relates to other people, you know what I mean? And she's especially near the end where she's just like kind of having a full mental breakdown of like, but this is how things were and this is how things work and like I can just get my way and I could just do this, and like that some of that's related to like probably unprocessed grief.
Right, definitely.
You know,
that's crazy. I need to rewatch that. I'm like, it's so true. It's like oftentimes, and that's why I wanted to do grief and media and talk about this, because I feel like so much is informed by pieces of grief, like my episode about Ariana Grande. I'm like, that's so much. Clueless, it's like when you think about it through that lens, it's completely, the whole story is because of her grieving her mother.
And they didn't have to make it blatant. That's what I think is really cool, is like it doesn't always have to be blatantly about that. Sometimes that is what a film is about. Yeah. But like sometimes it's actually just like delved into the character itself. Definitely. And sometimes I think that's just like honestly really beautiful because it lets you just kind of like live in the story and be like, ooh, cool, and not be too connected to like, oh, I have to deal with like this person is about to pass in the film.
Right.
But you can still kind of connect and understand and empathize at the same time. So,
oh my gosh, that is wild. Well, this has been such a great episode. I loved having you on. Do you have any last things you want to share? Then also you have to share where we can find Bravo Therapy too.
Oh gosh, yeah. Okay. I just want to say, like, I'm so grateful for you and that you've created this. I think that, again, like, I'm reading this book called, I think it's called Higher Purpose. And it's just really talking about like our purpose in life. But there's one point where that I'm at right now that's talking about like the purpose for everything. And it says like the purpose for, they call it suffering, but I connect that to like grief and loss and challenges and obstacles. And I'm like, that's always something that I've struggled with. Like, what is the purpose? That's what I can't figure out. I'm like, why would there be a purpose to people leaving us? Right. And it wasn't really giving you that, but what it was saying is like, we have a choice of like what we do with that grief. And that it's like, we don't put that on other people, number one, which is so hard because it's very natural to do. And that our choice is what we do with that emotion and like how we move through that and how we use that to inform ourselves and others and like really have a deeper purpose in life. And I think I just want to say, like, with what you're doing with this podcast, and I know it's the end of this season, hopefully more to come at some point, but this is helping other people. I mean, even just listening, I didn't know it existed until you had reached it out to me. And then when I started listening, it was the first time I started to even like actually delve back into processing my uncle's death, my grandmother's death, like so much grief. And this is your purpose coming out in this way. So I just want to name that. And I think that anyone who's going through like grief, like there is a way to repurpose that and give back. And guess what? Like that's where whoever's passed away, that's where their memory goes.
Definitely.
And it keeps living.
It's so true. And then if y'all make more media about grief, we can talk about it.
We can make, yeah. If y'all make more real media about grief and like the actual process and even infusing it, like we could talk about it more.
Definitely.
So,
well, thank you so much for being here. Where can we find Bravo
Yes.
Therapy?
Oh my gosh. Yes, please. Bravo Therapy is on. We have episodes every Tuesday, and then we have a smaller episode called the Bravo Breakdown, which is just like truly going over what's happened in the reality TV world on Fridays. We're on all major podcast platforms. Hopefully soon to be on YouTube in the next month or so. You can find us on TikTok at Bravo Therapy, and then on Instagram at Bravo Therapy Pod.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. And this is the season finale of the Grief and Media podcast, but you can find newsletters, writing, all of that on griefandmedia.com. And we'll see you soon. So don't worry. I'll be back.
Bye. She'll be back. She'll be back.
Yeah, I'll be back, everyone. Bye.
About 10 hours.
Thank you so much for listening to Grief and Media. If you liked this episode, please rate and review. Check out our media database, newsletter, essays, and more at griefandmedia.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at griefandmedia. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Love you all. I'll see you next time.